Christopher Columbus was born in the city of Genoa, Italy, way back in the 15th century. He was a well-known seaman in Italy. So well known that people would front up with bags of corn chips, cheese, and offer it as dip on a sacrificial altar with lambs. It's believed that the world was round, which was quite the anomaly back in those days, because everyone thought that the world was rather flat. They had four corners. In the Bible it says that there's four winds on the four corners of the earth. And so they literally believed that if you had a boat, got in it, and tried to sail to the other side of the world, you would fall off. And Columbus was going to prove that that was a myth. Face some real problems. Much like ourselves, when we want to do something, well, you need to have money, coin, moolah, which Columbus had none of. And so he went seeking sponsors to fund his venture. But there was no one willing to take it on. And so we went from Italy all the way over to Spain, Portugal, where he finally did find somebody who wished to fund his venture on the premise that he himself would bring back undescribable riches and such. It was in 1492 that King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, did give him lots of monies to go and fund his venture to find the Indies. And they didn't know at that time that there was a sliver of land between Europe and Asia. And it just so happened that Columbus did bump into it, saw some natives and said, "Oh, Los Indios." Hence, the Indies of the West. As Columbus and his sailors disembarked from La Mina, Los Isos, Las Marias, they discovered that these Los Indios were fantastic cricket players who spoke West Indian man. So every time they set down a delivery, it comes straight at their head, and Columbus did duck it around and put it down to square leg for 4 runs. La Pinta and Santa Maria did set sail and do some rummaging in the Indies, finding some wonderful plantations and colonizations and women with their bits hanging out everywhere, which was good for the local men who were on the ocean for so many years, and running after rats and scurvy wasn't much fun in the first place. So the main thing was that when they discovered these things, they thought to themselves that there was going to be lots of quantities of gold. They didn't find gold, but they did find something more shocking, something so sinister, begs description. Discovery that these people spoke a different language. Not just that, but to think that what they did do was bring a new culture, disease, and a new religion to the West. The religion of Christianity was henceforth then used to do other things to these people and change their minds and bring forth some goodlings who came back to England later and played good cricket, but also became a bastion of the civilized West. West Indies.
I know, Wolfie, I know. But no one will know. It's just you and me.
Don't forget that Columbus didn't just go once or twice. Thrice. And more so, it set the precedent for more expeditions out west. This Western pilgrimage, this new colonization set the ballpoint, the mark, for Europeans now to go west. And this was the catalyst in settling the Western lands, particularly Portugal, Spain, and England, who thus then set off and find the new world, and then changed into a totally Irish accent, and then to find things like Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, New York, and other things so beautiful, like Purcell, with their dancing. That was the most important thing that Columbus contributed, the belief that the world was there for the taking.
Looking at Magellan, he was a Portuguese sailor who is credited as being the first man as being able to circumnavigate the globe. So it's a pretty big achievement. But as we will see, there is a little bit of contention as to whether he actually was the first man to circumnavigate the globe. So Portuguese, and he was alive in around the 1500s, and he decided one day that he was going to take a fleet of 5 ships with 237 sailors to try and circumnavigate the globe, first sailing through the Spice Islands. So called because they were islands made of spice. There was an island that was made of cumin and turmeric, and one was cinnamon. No, they actually got the Spice Islands because they were sourcing spice to send to other islands and things. These days it's called Indonesia. Oh, hello. Well, continuing on the story of Magellan, we have a story of him and his 5 ships in the fleet actually coming into mutiny. There was a mutiny, and basically what happened is because when you have a bunch of sailors on a ship together, you can have a few people that decide that they want to try and take over the ship and use it for their own means, which is what they did. Magellan was able to quash the mutiny even though he was originally outnumbered, obviously because he was a pretty effective captain and strategist. So what happened was that he, instead of destroying all of the sailors, he only basically got rid of the ones who were leading the mutiny and kept the rest of the sailors on, otherwise he wouldn't be able to man his ships. So good move there, Magellan, well done. Continuing on from the mutiny, Magellan actually sailed south and then down around the bottom of South America through what are now called the Straits of Magellan, which is between the tip of South America and Antarctica, because he was the first one to theorise there's actually a gap there that he could get through. So he got around there, of course, because it's a small strait with lots of water and currents are moving through, there's a lot of turbulent water. So once he'd gone through that rough area of water, he came out into the now what we know as the Pacific Ocean, which is what he called it, the Pacific Ocean, because it was pacified as compared to the turbulent waters in the Magellan Straits between South America and Antarctica. From sailing into the Pacific Ocean, Magellan actually went out to the Philippines, which is where he got involved with a bit of a inter-tribal war that was going on between one king and another king of 2 different clans in the Philippines. He actually converted one of them to Christianity, which is what the Portuguese and the Spanish and most of the European explorers were all into in those days, convert different people to Christianity. And he decided he was going to help this chieftain that he had befriended by getting involved in this little inter-clan war that was going on. So Magellan and his crew actually sailed over to another island in the Philippines and went there and entered the war. And basically they took very heavy losses, and one of those losses was Magellan's head. Elcano, who was the second in command of Magellan's fleet, actually saw Magellan sitting on, or being surrounded by the natives of the island, and instead of going back and trying to save him, he basically left him to his fate, realising that he was already stuffed, or going to be stuffed, or at least going to be beheaded. So Magellan was killed, Elcano took over the fleet, and they eventually returned to Portugal, not Spain. And when they got back, they had only 18 members of the crew out of the original 237 that left. So you can see that in those days, circumnavigating the globe and taking these big sea adventures was a very, very risky venture, and one that sadly Magellan didn't come back from. So when people say that Magellan was the first man to circumnavigate the globe, possibly they are a little bit mistaken, as it really was probably Elcano and those 18 men that actually returned.
Hello there. Today, we're going to be talking about Sir Francis Drake, the second man to circumnavigate the world. Sir Francis Drake was born in England. In what year? They're not entirely sure. However, they speculate it was possibly in 1540. So what was his claim to fame? Well, he became the second man to circumnavigate the world, but he also was well known for his work against fighting against the Spanish Armada for Queen Elizabeth. But let's first of all talk about his early life. And early on in life, he was renowned as a remarkable sailor. In fact, so remarkable that the man who owned the ship he sailed on, when the man died, gave Drake the ship. That's pretty incredible, if you think about it. When he was just 23, Drake sailed to the Americas. Unbelievable that a man, just 23 years old, could sail so far on his own. He embarked on his first major independent enterprise and he attacked what they call the Isthmus of Panama, which was owned by the Spanish. Throughout his career, he was going to become a great pest to the Spaniards, to continually torment them. The Spanish called him a pirate. The English, with their penchant for the dramatic understatement, called him a hero. He began his circumnavigation of the globe in 1577. He sailed from England with 5 ships, but soon though he captured a Portuguese merchant ship called the Santa Maria that he renamed the Mary, which took his fleet then to 6. However, he had all sorts of troubles. For instance, he himself had just one mutineer, a man by the name of Thomas Doughty. He then sailed through the Strait of Magellan at the southern tip of South America, but in the process, one of the 3 ships in the strait was destroyed by a storm. Another returned to England, and that left only his flagship, the Pelican. After sailing through the Strait of Magellan and successfully finding the Pacific Ocean, he pushed up the coast of South America before sailing westward. Just off the coast of Peru, near the capital Lima, he captured a Spanish treasure ship laden with 25,000 pesos of Peruvian gold, or roughly $14 million by today's standards. That's a lot of money. And then he sailed north and landed somewhere north of Port Loma in California. Then he sailed west across the Pacific into Indonesia, and then he eventually rounded the Cape of Good Hope and reached Sierra Leone by 1580. Eventually, he did finish his circumnavigation, sailing into Plymouth with 59 crews remaining aboard. After Drake's fantastic efforts in circumnavigating the globe, the Queen knighted him, giving him his own coat of arms. It was pretty impressive what he did, to be sure, but he wasn't finished yet. Because he was knighted, he was then eligible to enter the House of Lords as a peer. With his own coat of arms, with political influence, he now had a grand opportunity to expand his career even further, and that's exactly what he did. He became mayor of the little town that he was in, but he also continued raiding, for the love of the sea was never far from him. When war broke out between the English and the Spanish, for Drake had annoyed the Spanish by consistently raiding them, who else was selected to command the English fleet than Francis Drake? Well, Drake decided he would preempt the Spanish attack and raided the port of Cadiz, where the main Spanish fleet was assembling. By doing this, he enabled England to have just a little bit more time before the invasion actually began. The amazing thing about what Drake did to the Spanish Armada was that the British forces were severely outnumbered. Drake took fire ships and ran them into the midst of the Spanish Armada, thereby scattering all the ships because it forced the ships to run away from these fire ships. By doing this, he could then sail up and pick off each ship individually, which was a very, very good tactic. Also helping him was one of the famous Channel storms. The Channel storm sprung up, which further scattered the ships, and some ships sailed around to Ireland, where they thought, oh, the Irish hate the British, we will surely gain acceptance there. Only the ones that tried to land failed to gain acceptance and were killed on the spot. Drake, after the Spanish Armada, was given a few different tasks to mop up the remaining Spanish fleet, all the ones that hadn't been destroyed by the storm and the fire ships, and the English fleet, supporting the rebels in Lisbon, and possibly capturing the Azores. Well, he was unsuccessful in all 3 of those accounts, but that didn't make him any less popular because he already had immense popularity. However, he died about 10 years later from dysentery in one of his other campaigns. So what do we need to remember about Drake? Well, Sir Francis Drake was a man of cunning, of courage and of immense bravery. Without Sir Francis Drake's contribution to England, especially in defeating the Spanish Armada, we might all possibly be speaking Spanish today.